You don't belong in first class, Karen said coolly as she tore the valid boarding pass in half, her tone dripping with judgment. Her eyes, filled with disdain, locked onto the casually dressed woman standing in front of her, unaware that within minutes she'd be out of a job, in full view of passengers, crew, and dozens of live streaming phones. The very woman she dismissed would publicly end her career. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the unraveling of everything Skywing Airlines had tried to keep under wraps. Because that ordinary woman wasn't just another traveler. She was Michelle Reed, billionaire, CEO, and one of the airline's largest shareholders, quietly holding 25% of its equity. Known for her fearless leadership and strong stance against injustice, Michelle had recently received troubling reports about covert discrimination by the airline staff. The allegations painted a disturbing picture. Travelers of color, despite holding valid tickets and credentials, were repeatedly mistreated, belittled, and even displaced to favor wealthier white passengers. Rather than issue empty statements or call yet another board meeting, Michelle chose a different path. She decided to see it for herself. Disguised in a black t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, no jewelry, no team, she blended into the crowd at the airport, boarding a Chicago to Los Angeles flight like any other passenger. But moments after entering the first-class cabin, reality hit. Luxury lined the aisles, soft lighting danced over pristine leather seats, but the real test was just ahead. Karen Anderson, the lead flight attendant, stood in her path. Impeccably dressed, with flawless posture and reputation for judging passengers by their appearance, Karen gave Michelle a long, slow scan, then spoke. "Ma'am, first class isn't for people like you." Gasps echoed around them. Some passengers looked away. Others stared, stunned. Michelle stayed calm, asking politely for clarification. But Karen didn't back down. "You know what I mean," she insisted. "This area is for very important guests. You should head back to economy." Without raising her voice, Michelle revealed her boarding pass. But instead of correcting her mistake, Karen grabbed the ticket and tore it in two as if to prove a point. The rip was sharp, loud, and symbolic. Then, another crew member, Jason Miller, approached. Arms crossed, he glanced at Michelle's simple outfit and chuckled. "Really thought you could pass for first class in that?" He smirked. "Try dressing the part next time." What neither of them realized was that Michelle had already sent a quiet message to her assistant before takeoff. What would follow would not just be a response, it would become a reckoning. Michelle didn't flinch. Her face stayed calm, her spine straight, her eyes locked with Karen's and Jason's, not with anger, but with unshakable resolve. In that moment, it became crystal clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a living example of the very injustice she had promised to eliminate from the airline she helped build. The silence inside the cabin was almost physical, charged with disbelief. As the ripped halves of her ticket floated to the floor like broken promises, Michelle bent down and calmly picked one up. Not out of pride, but because she knew that silence was no longer an option. Karen, still defiant, didn't apologize. Instead, she raised her voice, declaring to the entire cabin, "You can't fool us with a fake ticket." Her words echoed like a challenge, a warning shot aimed at anyone who might dare believe they belonged in that space. Jason, full of bravado, stepped in beside her. His grin said it all. "You thought jeans and a t-shirt would get you in here," he said with a mocking smirk. "Next time, spend a little more trying to look the part." Their behavior wasn't just cruel, it revealed a deeper sickness in the system. The way they dismissed her presence, the way they refused even to check her credentials. It wasn't about a ticket. It was about power, perception, and prejudice. Without raising her voice, Michelle calmly took out her ID and the elite Skywing Airlines membership card, a sleek black metal badge of her status and contribution to the company's success. "Please check your system," she said evenly. "You'll find everything there." But Karen didn't even look. She scoffed and turned away, replying coldly, "I don't need to check. We've seen cards like that before. You're not fooling anyone," Jason added with a shrug. "Every time people like you flash those cards, they think we'll fall for it. First class isn't for show." Their words weren't just about her. They exposed something far more dangerous, a culture of quiet exclusion, wrapped in luxury and fake smiles, and Michelle had heard enough. She spoke once more, her voice steady. "I'm asking one last time. Please verify my credentials." Karen stepped forward, louder this time, ensuring all eyes were watching. "Either move to economy, or I'll call security." The tension thickened. Michelle didn't move, not out of pride, but because she knew this moment mattered. And then, footsteps. The captain emerged from the cockpit, Brad Collins, a man with decades in the sky and a reputation for inflexible authority. He didn't ask questions, didn't look at her ID, didn't examine the situation. He just looked at Michelle like she was a problem and gave the final word. "This passenger needs to be removed, now." His voice was cold, final. Karen's face lit up with satisfaction. Jason folded his arms, clearly enjoying the scene. But what none of them knew was that Michelle Reed was seconds away from making the most important phone call of her career, one that would turn this moment into a reckoning. 1 minute later, a security officer appeared at the cabin entrance. Linda Foster, known across the airport for her firm hand and no-nonsense attitude. In her perfectly pressed uniform and calm yet commanding presence, she was every bit the symbol of authority. Her voice rang out across the stunned cabin. "You have 60 seconds to comply." Michelle didn't move. Her eyes met Linda's, not with defiance, but with unshaken dignity. She understood this officer was just doing her job, but that didn't excuse the haste, the refusal to verify facts, or the eagerness to humiliate rather than understand. "Before I go," Michelle said in a measured tone, "I'd like one final opportunity to confirm my credentials." Captain Brad didn't budge. "We're not here to play games," he said curtly. "The decision stands. Leave now." Karen's triumphant grin widened. Jason leaned back, arms crossed, clearly enjoying the moment. But Michelle didn't feel anger. What she felt was purpose, a renewed commitment to tear out the roots of prejudice from a company she helped build. She scanned the faces before her, Karen, smug and unmoved, Jason, mocking, Brad, cold and inflexible, and Linda, neutral but unwilling to question orders. She knew they were seconds from realizing just how badly they had misjudged her. Then, a quiet voice cracked the silence. "I saw her ticket scan as valid. We should double-check." All eyes turned to the source. Emily Turner, a junior flight attendant barely a month into her job. She stood near the aisle, visibly nervous, hands trembling, face pale. But something in her voice cut through the tension like a blade, not loud, but sincere and anchored in truth. Karen whipped around, her eyes sharp with warning. "Emily, you're new. Stay out of this." The words hit like a slap, meant to silence her. Jason smirked in approval, but Emily didn't retreat. She lowered her head for a moment, trembling, then looked up, locking eyes with Michelle. And in that instant, fear gave way to something stronger. With newfound clarity, she repeated, "Miss Reed's ticket did validate. I saw it. Please, let's just check." A ripple moved through the cabin. Passengers began whispering. A few nodded quietly. The illusion of control around Karen began to crack. Karen stepped toward Emily, voice low but firm. "Last warning, know your place." Emily stood her ground. Fragile in posture but strong in spirit, she didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Her stance alone spoke volumes. Michelle looked at her with quiet gratitude. Emily's courage had just shifted the entire energy in the room. The silence that followed was no longer fearful. It was expectant. For the first time, Michelle felt a shift. She wasn't alone. She had allies, not in uniforms, not in ranks, but in spirit. People willing to speak when silence would have been easier. And in that fragile but powerful moment, Michelle knew everything was about to change. Just behind the unfolding chaos sat Sarah Johnson, a 35-year-old white American with soft brown hair cascading over her shoulders. She wasn't just any passenger. Sarah was a respected travel blogger with a reputation for exposing injustice and amplifying stories of abuse and discrimination. She had been quietly watching the events from the moment Michelle boarded. Next to her sat Tom Carter, a sharp-suited businessman whose stern face revealed growing disbelief. He didn't know Michelle, but he knew exactly what he was seeing, and it wasn't right. When Emily spoke up, Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance. No words needed. They knew what they had to do. Sarah grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, her pulse racing. She opened her camera and started recording. Everything. The torn ticket, Karen's contempt, Jason's smirking condescension, and Michelle's silent grace was now immortalized. No narration was needed. The images spoke louder than any voice could. Tom did the same, capturing a second angle. His grip on the phone was firm, his jaw clenched. Though they'd been strangers seconds ago, now Sarah and Tom stood united. Silence was no longer an option. Sarah quickly uploaded the footage with a bold tag, "Check a Skywing scandal." Tom followed, sharing his video with the same hashtag. Within minutes, the internet caught fire. Dozens of views became hundreds, then thousands. Comment sections erupted. "This is outrageous. How can this happen in 2025? This airline needs a full reckoning." The videos spread like wildfire. Celebrities, journalists, civil rights groups, they all took notice. The hashtag shot up the trending charts. What started as a silent injustice mid-flight had become a global flashpoint for accountability. Karen and Jason, still basking in their perceived power, had no idea the tide had already turned. Michelle, standing tall and composed, caught Tom and Sarah's eyes. She nodded, just slightly. That was all it took, a signal that everything was about to change. The cabin felt different now. The silence wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation, a shift, a reckoning was coming. Karen's facade began to crack. She noticed Sarah recording and felt a tremor of uncertainty, but quickly masked it with defiant pride. She still believed she was in control. Michelle, meanwhile, moved with quiet purpose. She reached into her blazer, took out her phone, and calmly made a call. "Jennifer," she said clearly, "let the board know, now." Karen scoffed. "Calling the cops? This won't save you." But Michelle wasn't bluffing. Seconds later, the speaker on her phone crackled. "Michelle," said a serious voice, "the board has received the videos. They're convening immediately. They await your directive." Karen froze mid-smirk. Captain Brad looked rattled. The room felt heavier, like everyone sensed this wasn't just a scene anymore. It was history in the making. Karen tried to laugh it off. "So what? You're pretending to be someone important now?" Michelle didn't answer. She didn't have to. Just then, her phone buzzed again. This time, the voice was unmistakable. Michael Harris, senior board member. "Michelle," he said firmly, "we've seen the footage. We're monitoring everything. You have the board's full backing. We confirm your identity, CEO Michelle Reed. You have full authority to proceed as you see fit." Michael Harris's voice cut through the cabin like thunder. The weight of those words struck the crew with visible force. Karen's face drained of color. Her confidence vanished in an instant, replaced by sheer disbelief. Brad staggered backward, gripping the seat beside him to keep his balance. Every passenger in the cabin froze. Even Emily, still trembling, stood rooted. Sarah and Tom never stopped filming, their cameras now capturing what would become a defining moment. The truth was out. Michelle Reed wasn't just a passenger, she was the CEO, one of the airline's owners. And this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. Karen and Jason, once basking in their perceived authority, suddenly looked small, exposed, and deeply out of their depth. The very woman they tried to humiliate now stood as their judge and the symbol of long overdue accountability. A storm had broken loose inside Skywing Airlines, and Michelle was standing at its calm, commanding center. When Harris's voice continued over the speaker, "The board has received the viral footage. Immediate action is underway." A second wave of shock rippled through the cabin. Karen, who seconds before had raised her hand to signal security, now hesitated, her fingers twitching midair before falling helplessly to her side. Michelle didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She stood perfectly still, phone in hand, radiating quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout. Karen, desperate to regain footing, forced a shaky laugh. "Oh, how impressive. A phone call? That doesn't change the fact that you don't belong in first class." But even she didn't believe her words anymore. Michelle remained silent. The board's voice was more than enough. Then came the final blow. "Michelle Reed, CEO of Skywing Airlines and a primary shareholder, we acknowledge your authority. What just happened here is unacceptable and deeply against our core values. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Phones lifted again. Passengers stared, not just at Michelle, but at Karen, Jason, and Brad, faces now etched with shame. Karen looked around for support. There was none. Jason, who moments earlier had mocked Michelle with smirks and sneers, now avoided every gaze. Brad, the once authoritative captain, stood motionless, silent, pale, and visibly shaken. Then Michelle lowered the phone. She didn't need backup anymore. Her voice alone carried all the weight necessary. "I hope everyone here understands," she said steadily, "that no one has the right to strip another person of their dignity because of how they look. As CEO of Skywing Airlines, I will never allow this behavior to stand. Not today, not ever." The silence that followed was unlike any before, not heavy with fear, but filled with realization. Those who had once controlled the cabin now stood powerless, undone by their own actions. And Michelle Reed, composed, unshaken, and resolute, had reclaimed what was always hers: the authority, the truth, and the will to reshape an entire company's future. Captain Brad, once the embodiment of composure, now looked like a shadow of himself. His face turned ashen, his posture stiff, his eyes wide and haunted. The weight of his own failure crushed him, years of discipline and status undone by a moment of arrogance and blindness. Jason Miller, the young attendant who had laughed loudest, now stood utterly silent. His smirk was gone. In its place, numb fear. His hands shook, his fists clenched, and he refused to meet Michelle's gaze. The same woman he mocked was now the one holding his future in her hands. And then Michelle spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the still air with more force than any shout ever could. "Effective immediately, all crew members involved in this incident are terminated. You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and exit the aircraft. You will receive formal notice today." Karen's face collapsed. Her eyes searched Michelle's for mercy. Her lips moved, trying to form a plea. But there was no plea strong enough to reverse the truth. Michelle's expression didn't change. She had made her decision. Brad hung his head in quiet disgrace. Jason stared down, as if hoping the floor would swallow him. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers once frozen by tension now held up phones again, capturing justice in real time. A new wave of posts flooded social media, and alongside Nitro Skywing scandal, a second tag began to trend. Justice served. Emily Turner, still in uniform, now watched Michelle with quiet reverence. What she'd seen was more than a policy correction. It was leadership in its purest form, a promise that fairness still had a voice. Even Linda, the stern security officer, stood still, rattled. She knew just how close she had come to enforcing a terrible injustice, and in silence, she was grateful that she hadn't crossed that line. Michelle checked her watch, her voice clear and final. "Your time is up. Please leave." It wasn't a request. It was a closing statement. Karen, Brad, and Jason began their slow, humiliating walk toward the exit. Every step felt heavier than the last, burdened by the consequences of their actions. The cabin didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than applause. It was the silence of vindication, the silence of change. As they disappeared beyond the cabin door, Michelle stood tall. The storm had passed, but she knew this was only the beginning. And just then, a small voice broke the stillness. "Miss Reed," said Emily, stepping forward with shaky hands, "I have something you need to hear." She held out her phone. "I recorded Karen and Jason. They were planning to delete your seat assignment from the system, to justify removing you." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Michelle nodded calmly. "Play it." Emily pressed play. Her hands trembled, but the recording played clearly. "Just delete her from the seat map. She doesn't belong up here." Karen's voice. "No one's gonna believe she's a first-class passenger anyway," Jason added with a mocking laugh. As the audio ended, silence fell again. But this time, it burned with truth. No one could deny it now. The passengers looked at each other, stunned, disgusted, changed. What had been whispered suspicion became undeniable fact. Emily lowered the phone, eyes wet with emotion. Whether from stress or courage or release, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd spoken up. And in that moment, Michelle Reed wasn't standing alone. She was surrounded by witnesses, by truth, and by a new generation of voices refusing to stay silent. When Emily finally looked up, her eyes met Michelle's. What she saw wasn't authority or intimidation, but pride, quiet, unwavering respect. Michelle stepped forward, rested a hand gently on Emily's shoulder, and spoke for everyone to hear. "You did the right thing, Emily, and Skywing needs more people like you." Those simple words washed over Emily like sunlight breaking through a storm. The tension in her shoulders eased. Around them, passengers nodded in agreement. A few even clapped softly, not for spectacle, but in honor of a moment that truly mattered. At the side of the cabin, security officer Linda Foster stood frozen. She had nearly followed orders that would have helped cover up a grave injustice. And now, seeing the full truth unfold, she silently thanked her better instincts for stopping her just in time. Michelle turned to face the entire cabin. Her voice, calm but firm, filled the air. "We've just witnessed something painful, but necessary. Let this be clear. This kind of behavior will never again be tolerated at Skywing Airlines. Not on my watch. This airline will be built on fairness for every passenger, every time." A hush swept over the cabin, but this time it wasn't silence born of fear. It was the stillness that comes with witnessing something truly transformative, a shift in values, a public promise. Emily stood beside Michelle now, still shaking slightly, but no longer out of fear. She understood something vital. She wasn't just a new employee anymore. She had become a symbol of courage, a reminder that one small voice can lead to real change. And Michelle? She stood knowing this was only the beginning. Her work was far from over, but in that moment, she had begun rewriting the future of the company she helped build. Then, Michelle turned to Linda. "Linda," she said evenly, her voice full of controlled resolve, "escort them off this plane. This is no longer a request." Linda, usually known for her firm professionalism, felt the weight of the order. She had nearly made a terrible mistake, one that could have destroyed everything she stood for. But now she had a chance to do it right. She gave Michelle a small, respectful nod, a silent vow. Turning to face Karen, Brad, and Jason, Linda's voice was subdued but steady. "Please follow me." Karen lowered her head, her face pale and hollow. The pride she once wore like armor had vanished. Her steps were slow, heavy with regret. Behind her, Brad Collins followed, his expression ashen, his years of experience shadowed by one terrible lapse. Jason walked last, silent and shaken. The swagger was gone. In its place, the unmistakable sting of accountability. As they moved down the aisle, not a single passenger spoke, but dozens still held their phones, quietly recording the moment. No words were needed. This was justice, captured in real time. When the door finally closed behind them, the air in the cabin shifted. The pressure broke. A long collective breath filled the space. Linda returned to the doorway. Her voice, for the first time, wavered with emotion. "Miss Reed, I'm deeply sorry. I came seconds from making a serious mistake. I accept whatever consequences may come." Michelle looked at her for a long moment. Then, with just a hint of softness in her tone, she answered, "Linda, what matters most is that you learned the lesson. Skywing will never ignore wrongdoing, but we do believe in second chances when someone chooses to stand for what's right." Linda exhaled quietly. A second chance had been granted, not just for her, but for the future of Skywing Airlines. From that moment on, Linda Foster silently vowed never to let herself drift so far from what was right again. She understood just how close she'd come to a terrible mistake, and how fortunate she was to still have the chance to make it right. Michelle then turned back to the passengers. Her voice rang out, clear, sincere, and full of strength. "I want to personally apologize for what you've just witnessed. Skywing Airlines will be conducting a full and transparent review of this incident. Discrimination in any form has no place in this company. Today reminded us all of something simple and vital. Every person deserves dignity, no matter how they look, where they're from, or how they're dressed." This time, the response came not in silence, but in applause. Real, heartfelt applause. The fear and tension that once filled the cabin melted into a shared sense of hope. The passengers believed in what they had just witnessed, not just an apology, but a promise. Michelle knew the road ahead would be long, but she had taken the first real step. She looked around the cabin, at the people who had witnessed every moment of the confrontation. Her expression had shifted. It no longer carried steel or defiance, only quiet certainty. "Today," she said, "I didn't just speak up for myself. I spoke for every person who's ever been judged unfairly, for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Her words didn't just land, they resonated. They settled into the hearts of everyone present. This wasn't just about an airline anymore, it was about justice. Then Michelle turned to Emily Turner, the young flight attendant who had stood up when it mattered most. With a warm, steady hand on her shoulder, Michelle made an announcement that caught even Emily by surprise. "Emily, your courage today didn't just protect me, it reminded everyone of what integrity looks like. As of now, I'm officially promoting you. You will step into a new leadership role here at Skywing, because this airline needs more people like you." For a split second, Emily didn't move, but then the cabin erupted. Applause filled the space, passengers cheering, a few even rising from their seats in admiration. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, her voice caught in her throat. She bowed slightly, overwhelmed with pride and gratitude. At that moment, a truth became crystal clear. Real power doesn't come from a title or a uniform. It comes from doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Linda Foster stepped forward too. No longer defensive, she offered Michelle a respectful nod, a silent vow to do better. Then Michelle smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. as she faced the cabin one last time. I know this flight didn't go the way anyone expected, but if we leave here remembering one thing, let it be this: every single person deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. From this day forward, Skywing Airlines will not only set the standard for service, but for equality too. The final applause echoed with conviction. This wasn't just a corporate message, it was the beginning of something real. As Michelle returned to her seat, a new calm settled across first class, but everyone knew this wasn't the end of a story, it was the start of a movement. Michelle Reed's stand had transformed a moment of injustice into a turning point for the entire airline. She wasn't just CEO, she was a leader willing to fight for what's right. And beside her stood Emily Turner, a living symbol that change always begins with courage. This is the story of a flight that changed everything. Now we ask you, if you were in Michelle Reed's place, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories about justice, courage, and respect. Thank you for watching.